Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and on the podcast today, you're actually going to hear a conversation I had with my friend Kelly Collins, and this conversation was from her Year of You virtual retreat that went live in January at the start of 2022. And then she shared our conversation on her podcast, the Soul Spark podcast with Kelly Collins. And part of the reason why I really wanted to share this conversation with you, well, there are so many reasons, but first of all, over the last almost 5 years, I've had the incredible opportunity, pleasure, honor, all of the words, all of the emotions to go on so many incredible podcasts and talk more about my journey and the podcast and lessons learned. And honestly, the opportunity to connect with other podcasters in this space has been incredible. And Kelly is one of those podcasters, those women, those people who I've had the opportunity to connect with, and we have collaborated in so many ways. Kelly was on the podcast back in, I think it was the end of 2020, maybe 2021. I have to double check. I'll put the episode in the show notes. And she invited me on her podcast, and I've been part of her Year of You virtual retreat a couple of times. And so this episode, I think, is really special because it's all about finding joy through rest. When I took a break from the podcast towards the end of 2021, I was really burned out in every area of my life. And truthfully, and you'll hear me talk about this in this episode, I never thought that choosing my own rest would actually be something that brought me joy. But at the time, it was exactly what I needed. And a huge theme in my life constantly is learning to be self-aware enough in the moment to know when I need rest, to know when I need to hit pause, to know when I need to put my foot back on the accelerator, knowing when to dive back in. This is something I'm really working through. And so that's why I think this conversation is so special and so spot on, because I'm about to enter a new period of rest with the podcast and hopefully, fingers crossed, in life over the summer. And it just felt so timely to share this one with you. So as always, I cannot wait to hear what you think. I can't wait to hear your takeaways from this conversation because I think we're constantly navigating burnout in our lives and constantly navigating how we want to approach a situation, what our self-care looks like. That self-care shifts constantly. I also know you're going to love Kelly. She's an incredible host. You're going to love this conversation. So make sure to check out Kelly. Head on over to kellycollinswellness.com. Hit subscribe and follow to the Soul Spark podcast. She shares some really incredible conversations over there. And without further ado, let's dive into this one. It's really all about finding joy through rest. Kelly, thank you so much for letting me share this one on the podcast. And I'll see you guys on the other side. Hi, everyone. We are here with Sydney Weiss, who's back for Year of You. And Sydney is a lawyer and the founder and producer of Seek the Joy podcast and Stories of Inspiring Joy. Sydney's greatest mission is to uplift and empower others to find their authentic voice, encourage them to step into their vulnerability and courage, all to seek their joy and bring about greater healing. And through her platforms, she's been able to do just that. And if you look at her, she's just a bundle of joy, a ball of sunshine. Welcome, Sydney.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be part of Year of You again. So thank you for having me. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today because I think it's going to be super timely.
I think so too. As I was saying before we pressed record, I said, we can't be the only ones feeling this way.
There's no way. I mean, I was reflecting, and I know today we're going to talk a lot about this element of self-awareness and knowing when you need to take a break and hit pause. And I was just reflecting on the fact that it's about to be like, we're entering, what is it, like year 3 of the pandemic. And so there's no way, at least at some point in the last couple of years, we haven't all felt this need to hit pause and figure out and self-evaluate, I think, like where we are and what can we handle and what can we let go of. And it is a constant conversation with yourself.
Totally. And I think a lot of the realm that we're in is about like being positive, and a lot of what I teach is like manifestation and all of that.
But none of that is possible unless you're honoring where you are at. And it's not all about being like, it's 100% not about being full functioning all the time, doing all the things, being positive, all of that. So yeah, I think this is really, really important. So why don't we just start off by you telling people kind of like a little bit more about yourself. I'll link a couple of our old things in the landing page so people can view that too. But you can share a little bit about yourself, like, and what were you doing and what have you been stepping away from? And like, what does that all look like for you?
Yeah,
you know?
Of course. So I am a lawyer. I work at a television studio. We make TV shows. I make the contracts and do the deals for stuff behind the scenes. And so that's what I do in my day-to-day life. And then in addition to that, as you mentioned in the intro, I am the founder and producer behind Seek the Joy podcast and Stories of Inspiring Joy. And so I started Seek the Joy. Gosh, I just celebrated 4 years of the podcast. So I started it back in 2017 after I had this really tumultuous journey studying and sitting for the bar exam to become licensed to practice law. And through a slew of health issues from shingles to appendicitis, I really recognized I needed to approach my life in a very, very different way. And so I did. I slowed down. I developed greater self-trust. I dove headfirst into personal development. And so by the time I sat for the bar the second time, I was like, I've got to start a podcast. Like I really wanted to connect with people and have conversations like this one where we were being fully honest and transparent and vulnerable about our experiences, because it's through the sharing of what we've gone through and what we're currently going through that we build community, friendship, understanding, and also I think give ourselves a little bit of grace. And I think we need a lot more of that. So I passed the bar, I started the podcast, and it has just been like pedal to the metal. Is that a phrase? Like it's just been like 0 to 100 ever since. And when the pandemic started, I was really energized to continue to share conversations and share stories from people that we may not normally or otherwise hear from. And so I started my second podcast, Stories of Inspiring Joy, at that time. And then, the pandemic kept going. And I suffered loss in my own life. My grandpa passed away in October of 2020. My grandmother passed away in August of 2021. And through really the highs and lows of grief, I recognized that I was not giving myself rest and time to really integrate what the last couple of years have been like for me. And so when we approached the 4-year anniversary of Seek the Joy back at the beginning of October, I made the choice to step away from the podcast and all things Seek the Joy, Stories of Inspiring Joy, the whole platform for 3 months. And let me tell you, at first, I did not think that stepping away and choosing this element of rest and really choosing myself in that moment would bring me any source of joy, because it meant taking a break from the podcast. It meant taking a break from these connections. It meant taking a break from so much that was energizing me. But as I am about to start publishing again in January of 2022, I'm just recognizing more and more it is exactly what I have needed. So in the last 3 months, I have just hit pause in a way that I just never did before. And it's been really, really powerful for me, for sure.
So beautiful. Yeah. And I think that it can be so hard to take a step back when we put forward so much into something. But change is inevitable. And if we're intentional about change, we get to do what you're doing right now, like knowing that this is an intentional period of time, so you can rejuvenate, you can create space for other things to pop up if they want to. Exactly. And then you can dive back in. Yeah.
And I really treated this period of rest for myself as like a greater opportunity to figure out how I can fuel my tank back up again, so that I can create from a space of joy, so that this is fun for me again. It's about being intentional and thoughtful and bringing that joy back for me, because I was going through the motions so much. And I think you're right. Like we need to make space sometimes for new beginnings, for new things to come into our lives. And if we are stuck in the hustle of something we've created, even if we love it, but if we're not feeling rejuvenated, or if we just feel more and more depleted, I think that is a really good sign of, hey, I need to take a step back so that I can figure out how to be more intentional and thoughtful and create from a space that is light and excited and joyful, as opposed to being so depleted. So I really had to like take stock of where I was at back in September, and recognizing that I needed to get grounded again, and I needed to, get more in touch with myself. I think after, a year, 2 years of being so deeply immersed in the pandemic and the emotions and the roller coaster, I think that we've all been on. So I love what you said about creating this space, because we need to, like, we feel like we always have to be engaging in the world. Like, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like we always have to be connected. I've got to be responding to that email, having that phone conversation with a friend, being responsive at work. And the truth is we don't always receive the message that it's okay to take a step back. Like, there's so much self-judgment. It feels difficult, like we're letting ourselves down if we unplug ourselves, so to speak. But the truth is once you do unplug, you allow yourself, I think, to release judgment, to develop greater grace for yourself, and really just tune back in to who you are without all that extra noise that exists.
Yeah. We're so conditioned to be like one type of a person.
100%.
And we kind of talked about this before, like human design a little bit, like people are different. Yes. We're not all one size fits all, but we're all conditioned in the Western world really to function in one way, which is to go, 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 do. And I think even those people who are like designed to do that, like they can get burnt out too. And that's why, like you said, like boundaries, structures, that's one of the first things I do with my clients. And then, but it's funny, like talking about these things, right? It's like, you realize it's like, for me, it's a constant coming back to what I'm teaching. And that's why I love teaching what I teach, because it's also this like great reminder for me too, but setting those boundaries and structures is everything. So I wanted to ask you, like, how do you go about doing that for yourself? Like honoring, setting the boundaries, and then actually like sticking to them.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because even when I was not publishing any new content, not creating any new content over the last 3 months, I was still getting emails, and I was still getting pitches, and I was still, getting tagged in things on social media, even though I stopped posting or putting things out there. And what I did ahead of time was create sort of a template for myself of what I wanted to say to people. I didn't have an out of office necessarily, because that to me just felt like a lot. But I told people, like, hey, I'm taking this period to rest and to not engage, and I'll get back to you when I plug myself back in, so to speak. I would check emails once a week. So it would be on a Friday for the podcast. Can't get away with that at work, but could get away with that for the podcast. And on Fridays, I would check in to my inbox, and I would respond to a bunch of things. And then I would step away again for the following week. And for me, that was a big boundary, because before I was checking my podcast emails and scheduling things and coordinating things almost every evening, every day. And it just became way too much. So I think it's about knowing when and where you want to check back in. Can you create a template for yourself? Can you create something ahead of time so that you are prepared when someone reaches out to you, or, how you want to handle something? I think too, for me, being very clear on how I wanted to spend my time over the last 3 months. So that meant more time, to be honest, just not doing anything, sitting on this couch that's behind me, unplugging, tuning into a great book. I found so many great TV shows to start watching, seeing my friends, going for long walks on the weekend, just being very clear about the ways in which I wanted to spend my time. But the greatest boundary that I think, and I don't know if this is a boundary, but I think for me, it was about becoming just more emotionally aware of how I was feeling in any given moment. And I recognized that to be more mindful in that way really meant I had to slow down. So even though I was unplugging myself from one area of my life, it was so easy because of my personality to feel like, okay, I'm going to go in these other areas. And I recognized about like 3 weeks in, like, no, like you can't not engage in one thing and throw yourself fully into another. Like you really, I think, need to slow down. And that's what I told myself every day, to like be more mindful in this moment means that I really have to slow down. And there was something that you said before about how society views like we're supposed to be one way, especially in the Western world. And I think there's so many productivity metrics or measurements that are like inserted into every area of our life. And even when it comes to rest, like how much time am I resting and how do I feel at the end of this resting? And I learned like there's all these different types of rest. There's emotional rest, spiritual rest, physical
and am I
rest.
resting right?
Yeah. Like, am I resting the right way? And I feel like this reminds me so much of a conversation I had on the podcast in 2020 with, her name is Megan Watson, and she's a psychotherapist and the founder of Bloom Psychology and Wellness. And she talked to me about the difference between enough rest and the kind of rest that you want. So you could spend forever napping on the couch, but you could still feel depleted, because the truth is you don't need physical rest. You could need emotional rest. You could need spiritual rest. And so it's about, I think, diving into those types of rest, which I'm certainly not an expert on, but I think it's worth exploring, and then tapping into the type of rest that you want. And I think the more that we can do that, that's a really beautiful boundary that we can create for ourselves of, first of all, removing this element of productivity that's attached to rest, like resting. So that means I can, like only resting as a way to justify the work I've done before. We need to walk away from that. And then also recognizing, are you getting enough rest? And is it the kind of rest that you want or need? Which for me was a huge boundary. And then one other thing I just thought about is when we're resting and we're taking time away, either from something that we love and that we engage with in the world, something that I really struggled with and continue to sort of work out for myself is, how can I continue to nurture myself while still engaging with the world and still maintaining the relationships and the connections that are the most important to me, filling my tank up while still filling up the tanks of those different buckets, that we have in our lives, friendships, relationship, work, etc. And that has been just a really interesting exploration for me as well. And recognizing like, I can't give myself to anybody else until I really fill my tank back up in a way. Oh my gosh, sorry, referencing so many podcast episodes, but it reminds me of a conversation I had with this woman. Her name is Akia Red. And she said to me, you fill up your cup for yourself. The overflow is for others. And I was like, boom, mic drop. That's it. Because it's the overflow, right? It's like the overflow that you can give, not, your own cup, but the overflow. And I've just taken that lesson with me in the last 3 months, which has been so necessary. Now more than ever, I just think it's so important that we have reliable resources that we can turn to. And that's where today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. So I would love to share with you a little bit more about BetterHelp. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And it's easy and free to change counselors if you don't think the person you've matched with is a good fit. And no matter where you're listening to Seek the Joy podcast right now, you can also use BetterHelp because the service is available for people worldwide too. I just think it's so valuable to talk to someone about what it is that you're going through, whether that's anxiety, depression, grief, loss, changes at work, or friendship dynamics or relationships, or you want to talk about the challenges of the last couple of years. And BetterHelp offers a broad range of expertise in their counselor network. So you'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions too, which I still think is a game changer. I really want you to live a happier, more joyful, and just ease-filled life. That's why I share these conversations with you. And so I'm just excited to share that as a listener of Seek the Joy podcast, you will get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/seekthejoy. Join over 1 million people and counting, taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/seekthejoy. The link will also be included in our show notes.
Yeah. I love that you bring up the different types of rest that you could need, because we do so often just think of rest as like laying on the couch
as one thing, right?
Meditating or reading or whatever, it's like, but there is so much of this need for emotional rest, especially in like the world that we've been living in, and that spiritual rest as well.
Yeah.
A couple of things that came to me when you're talking, I feel like there's this way to like look at, seek the joy, right?
Yeah.
how can your rest bring you joy? Like doing things that bring you joy, that feel restful. Cause that's really, I feel like, what resets your soul when you're, if I'm like painting something, like that's restful for my soul, emotional rest can be, letting your emotions go, or actually like seeking, healing in some way, and actually letting yourself release and then rest. Like there's so many different ways, but I feel like doing things that bring you joy that also rest you and like rejuvenate you is so powerful.
And I think my rest and choosing rest has allowed me, I think, to look for joy in new spaces and in new ways, and not attaching myself to one thing or one way for so long. And this still rings true. I mean, the podcast has brought me so much joy, connecting, learning about someone else, the opportunity to be creative with the graphics. And especially as a lawyer, I mean, I spend most of my time being creative and crafting a deal, but it's very different from what I get to do with the podcast and with these conversations. And that's also why it was so challenging for me to actually acknowledge that I needed rest, that I needed to take a step back, that I didn't have it in me to produce and create content the way that I had been for 4 years nonstop. And once I allowed myself to kind of let go of the attachment to what I thought my joy was, I was able to find joy in new ways and in new spaces and in different conversations and on long walks with friends, and just allowing myself to sit and be with me, because rest for me has really meant showing up for myself in a new way and acknowledging where I actually am in this moment and what I need, and releasing the idea that it has to look, a certain way. And we can't show up as who we really are, as who we are meant to be in any given moment, if we're stretched too thin, if we're totally burned out. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm really tired, there's no empathy. There's no compassion there, especially for myself. There's greater judgment. There's greater impatience. I'm harder on myself. I'm harder on others. And so I think if I could share the biggest thing that I've learned through taking this rest and allowing myself to find joy in new ways. And I love what you shared about painting, because it's about allowing yourself that freedom and that ability to express yourself. I think for me, I've learned that taking care of myself and nourishing myself and allowing myself to rest or take a break is going to be a necessary thing. Like it's going to be a necessary ritual and a necessary part of who I am. And so as I look forward to 2022, and I encourage everyone listening to do this as well, think about where you can carve out a break, where you can carve out rest. And then what do you want that rest to look like? Is it sitting on the couch, or is it going to explore a new part of your city? Is it, diving into a new book, or is it, putting on an audiobook and going for a walk? Think about where you can carve out those spaces of rest, and then also what you would love and like for it to look like, because this journey of like working on yourself and nourishing yourself and diving into this element of self-awareness is lifelong. Like it doesn't stop. It doesn't end. There's no destination. You're continuing to refine yourself as you go. And then the other element of this too, Kelly, has been like trying to determine and know when it's time to get back out there again, and when it's time to start creating again and connecting again and re-enter the spaces that we've created and that we love and that have nourished us, but that we needed to take a break from. And that has been a necessary part of this journey too, of this balance of taking that break and then being able to gauge when it's time to re-enter those spaces again. So it has been a roller coaster, but so
100%.
necessary, because it's about creating this life that honors your boundaries and your capacity and ability to engage in the things that you love and the things that you don't, but doing so, I think, without judging yourself, without shame, without attaching yourself to this element of productivity, because within that is like so much unnecessary criticism that we impose on ourselves. It's not coming from anybody else. There were so many people who noticed that I wasn't publishing new episodes or posting online. And so many people checked in, and I was like, yeah, all is good. I'm just taking a break and I'll see you soon. And do you have any ideas of things you want me to share? Because I'm excited for 2022. So I think it's just about tapping back in and cultivating that element of self-awareness for yourself.
Yes. Oh, so good. And I'm so happy we're sharing this on the first day of the retreat, because I hope that as we go through these few days, and as people like enter 2022, they can really take what you're saying and look at the year ahead, get super intentional. Cause then there's not that like, when you're intentional about it, there's not that like holding on too tight. You're like, oh, this is what I plan to do. I'm going to give myself this space to rest. And there's just less resistance. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's more flow. So, and sharing your voice with us. And why don't you tell everyone about your freebie that you're going to share?
Yes. Okay. So I created way back in the day, this Seek the Joy guide to infusing more joy into your life, because every conversation I was having on the podcast, every guest had this beautiful nugget of wisdom of how they seek their joy and things that they do to maintain it and bring it back into their lives. And it just inspired this sort of process of way of tuning and turning back into yourself and checking in and figuring out what brings you joy and then how you can bring more of it into your life. So I know you have a link for it. It's super easy to get that freebie, and I've loved it. And you'll see some quotes and some reflections from some past guests in that guide as well. And I really enjoy sharing it. So thank you for letting me share it with this beautiful audience.
Yes, it's so well done. You guys check it out. It's amazing, super inspiring, and a great thing to take into the year with you. So thank you again, Sydney. You guys, I'll put all her links, but maybe do you want to share with them? Where can they find you?
Make it easy. Of course. Yeah. And thank you for having me. This is, I guess, my third time participating in Year Review, because I did it twice in 2021. And every session is, I know, every session is so beautiful and filled with so much wisdom. So I'm so honored to share a little bit, I think, of my journey, and hopefully it inspires you to navigate your own burnout and be, I think, intentional with your time and your rest, especially as we enter this brand new year. So you can find all things Seek the Joy Podcast at seekthejoypodcast.com. There's also a link there as well for stories of inspiring joy. We have a blog called Joy Corner. Everything is there. 4 years of podcasting, so many incredible episodes. And Kelly, you and I did an episode on my podcast as well. So there's just so much good things to check out, and connect on Instagram. We're at Seek the Joy Podcast. Just would love to meet you and connect with you, and would love to know your biggest takeaway from this session as well.
Hey, you're the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Seek the Joy Podcast is a production of Seek the Joy Media and created, produced, and hosted by me, Sydney Weiss. You can tune into all of our episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and if you're enjoying the show, hit follow and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure to join the community, join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere, and don't forget, you can actually watch today's new episode and all of our episodes on our brand new YouTube channel. Click that link in the show notes to subscribe and tune in. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you right back here next week for another Seek the Joy Tuesday.